Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about color grading. In the previous video, I talked a little bit about how I'm going to be switching to Davinci Resolve for the most part for all of my editing. And one of the big reasons for that was color grading. So today, as I'm kind of making that switch, I'm wanting to actually build out a little bit of a general look that I'm going to be going for most of the content that I'm going to be shooting, whether it be my own stuff for YouTube or just a generic kind of look or a general kind of starting point look when it comes to our client project so that everything's somewhat consistent. Obviously, depending on the client, you're going to tweak this and alter this a little bit depending on what the project calls for. But the same way that often, people will hire you for a look as a photographer, they see your Instagram grid and they kind of know what to expect from you. I like to approach that in a similar way when it comes to video, just so that clients kind of know what they're paying for. They know what they're getting. And so I kind of had this a little bit built out as like a LUT in Premiere that I would use. But now that I have access to Davinci and I can save these things as a power grade, I am going to be doing exactly that. I'm going to be creating a look for my business and then saving that as a power grade and being able to recall that later down the road. So let's go ahead and dive in and start building this look. Okay, so here we are in Davinci Resolve. I'm essentially going to start off by creating a node tree and just kind of going from there, starting to see what nodes that I want included. And with this look, I'm going to try to be a little bit general with it. So I'm going to try to make kind of like sweeping adjustments versus really granular ones, because this is meant to be a look that's replicated among all of our different videos that we're creating, or at least most of them. And so I want this to work on several different clips, on several different projects. I want it to be very transferable, not necessarily something that just looks good on this one clip. Now we do a decent amount of studio stuff. So I do have this shot of me in the studio, which is going to be a pretty decent starting point. So I'm basically going to be working off of this and kind of going from there. And so let's get started. I'm going to start building this tree out. So the first one is going to be, it's going to be our balance. Now this is basically going to be for color correction. I'm actually not going to touch this too much when it comes to building this out, because I want this to be something that's kind of custom for each clip. I want this to be the one node that's kind of left at the beginning of the chain, or just about the beginning of the chain, where I can just kind of adjust white balance, exposure on a clip by clip basis. That's where this is all going to happen. And so for right now, I did try to expose the best that I could in camera, but I also shot this in RAW so that we can make these adjustments in RAW. And so this isn't actually going to affect, like, we can get a proper exposure and it's not going to affect our balance node here. Hopefully that makes sense. If I'm shooting RAW for a project, I can just do that and skip this balance node and just do all of my adjustments in the RAW camera settings here. And so that's something that I kind of get the option. So if I'm shooting ProRes, I'll have this balance node built out so that I can make my color correction versus grading in this node. And then if I'm shooting in RAW, then my color correction will, as much as I can, happen in that camera RAW kind of tab here. So let's go ahead. I'm actually going to change this to clip, and all of that is great. So this is essentially all of our raw data that we can pull on after. But right now I don't really know where we're sitting because this is in log, and so we're sitting really flat. So I'm going to build this tree out, and then we're going to add our LUT basically at the end of the tree here. So let's keep going. I'm actually going to add a node before balance, and this is going to be for grain. I like that happening at the very start of the node tree. I think that's probably the best place to put it, just before all of these effects kind of get baked into the footage. So I'm going to keep going here. Let's do our look, and we're going to create a layer node, and this is going to be our skin tones. And another layer node, this is going to be our highlights. And let's get another serial going here. This is going to be our global adjustment. So after this looks kind of created, this is where it's all going to kind of come together. We can adjust our contrast and saturation, pieces like that, after we kind of have these nodes affected there. Next one is going to be our glow. And next one is going to be our sharpness. Let's see if I can spell there. Beautiful. Okay, and then I'm going to, shoot, I did not mean to make a layer node there. Let's go ahead and undo that. There we go. This is going to be our vignette if we need it. And then we're going to add our color space transform. And then we're going to add a LUT at the very end. Okay, here we go. So this is essentially what our starting point is for node structure. And we're going to start to dial all this in as we go. So we might be going out of order. This isn't necessarily, this is the order that we want the processing to happen in. That's not necessarily the order that we're going to grade this in though. So I'm going to go to our color space transform here, and I'm going to pull out our color space transform effect here, and we're just going to start dialing this in for what this is shot in. And so this is shot in red wide gamut RGB, and we are in red log 3G10, and we're going to bump this over to Rec 709. And then this last piece, we're actually going to put this in, where is it? Cineon film log. There we go. Now, you might wonder, why am I putting this in Cineon instead of Rec 709? So if I did Rec 709, now our colors are looking pretty natural, right? Like this is what we would expect to see out of camera. But we're actually going to apply this LUT, which is the Kodak 2383 LUT. And that is used to receiving footage from the Cineon film codec. And so that is why we need to convert our footage to that beforehand. So we're going to go up here, Cineon film log, and then under LUT, we're going to go ahead, go down to LUT, and we're going to go under, what is it under again? I think it's under like looks or something like that. Film looks, there we go. And Kodak 2383. I'm going to pick this kind of neutral one. Actually, let's see. Let's see what our options are here. This first one, a little more orange. And then I'm assuming there's a little more blue. Yeah. So we're going to want it neutral. So I'm going to pick that guy right in the middle. The D60. Beautiful. Okay, so going from log to now we have it converted to the color space that we want to be seeing this in, and we have a LUT applied, which is going to be our kind of starting point for our whole look here. So I'm going to go ahead, we're going to skip balance, we're going to start going to look. So I'm going to go under our log wheels here, and we need to make sure that these are deselected so that we're just seeing this top layer node. And I'm just going to start pumping a little bit of blue into the scene, and I want to be careful with what those blue tones are. We don't want too green, we don't want too magenta up here. I want a pretty decently balanced kind of blue hitting our background here. I kind of like that we have this gray background because it gives me a pretty good sense for how we're actually affecting these colors and how balanced this is going to be, because this is almost like a neutral gray, right? Like a mid gray tone. Obviously we have a little bit of like the sun coming in here, and so there's some gradients to it, but still a pretty good representation for kind of like mid gray. So that's going to help us out. Just make sure that our tones, when we dial everything in, are still somewhat neutral. So I'm bringing this blue in. We don't want it to be like too crazy. We will balance it out, but I just want to make sure that we have a pretty decent kind of like neutral blue here. Yeah, something like that is feeling good to me. So now I'm going to balance it out with the gamma. So I was adjusting the lift, so that's kind of like the lower end of the range. And now we're going to adjust essentially where our skin tones are sitting, that kind of mid-range. So we're going to pump some orange back into it.
I'm just trying to balance everything out a little bit here. Before, after. We've got some good color contrast going on there. I'm going to pump a little bit more orange though. Just keep it a little bit more on the neutral side. It's feeling pretty decent. Let's full screen it, see where we're sitting. It's looking pretty good. I think we're going a little too towards magenta. I'm going to pull that back a little bit. Now again, I want this to really transfer to a lot of other clips, so I want to stay fairly neutral with these tones here. Don't want to bake in too crazy of a look, but I do like having a little bit of that color contrast. Dial that blue back just a little bit. And a little bit more orange. Just watching my skin tones. I don't want to go too crazy far with it. Something like that feels fairly balanced to me. We have a nice color contrast between those blues and the oranges in my skin tone there. So that's feeling pretty decent to me. Or maybe a little blue in that background. I don't want all of my kind of mid-tone grays to be sitting that far blue, so I might want to just dial that back just a touch. Yeah, that feels a little more balanced to me. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to come into our skin node here. So what I'm going to do is actually go under our qualifier, and I'm going to select some of these skin tones, and then I'm going to get a little more precise. So bring it down a little bit. We don't want all those green tones in there. Can maybe dial it in a little bit more. I do want to keep it somewhat broad just because, again, we might be dealing with skin tones that are in like slightly different in different shots. And so we want to make sure that we still qualify our skin tones even when we have a shot that isn't this specific one. So I want it to be narrow enough that it is mostly just selecting our skin tones, but keeping it just wide enough that it's still going to give us a little bit of range in the future. Something like that. Let's give us a little bit more range and saturation just to be safe. And let's see how our luminance is affected here. I'm going to try to, get rid of that jacket. I don't want to affect my jacket at all. Something in there may be good. And then we'll just add a pretty decent amount of blur just to make sure that this is going to hold up in different shots. Something like that. Okay, so on and off, we're basically just getting back. It's very subtle. We're seeing a little more pink, so we're just getting away from that look that we had baked in a little bit. But we're going to basically take advantage of this by dialing in our skin tones exactly where we want them to sit. And so by doing that, I'm going to press H, and that's going to give us kind of dialed into exactly where our skin tones are sitting. So I'm going to go under our vector scope, and I'm just going to make sure that under our gamma, we are sitting right on that line that we want to be sitting on, that skin tone line. And if we go on and off, okay, looking a little Oompa Loompa, we're going to pull back those orange tones a little bit. So we want it to be on the line, but we're just kind of dialing in how much saturation we actually want in that skin. I might actually push it a little bit more and then just dial back the saturation on this node so that in the future our skin's going to sit on that line, but it'll be nice and tasteful as to how much is actually dialed in. I think we're sitting a little green with these tones. gonna pull this back a little bit towards the green, towards the magenta, sorry. It feels a little more balanced. I think we can bring a little bit of saturation back in. Something like, let's even just reset that and see where we're sitting. Something like that actually feels fairly natural to me. We might be a little hot with the saturation, but I might just dial that in later. See before and after. Yeah, so you can see we're going from quite magenta skin tones to now we're just coming back into more of a neutral orange territory. I think we still are sitting a little bit too green, and so I'm just gonna bump that back just a little bit. Something like that, maybe a little bit more magenta. We've just gone a little too far. Yeah, that feels natural to me. Okay, perfect. It's all these little subtle changes, right? Like, obviously we've changed the look of our whole image, and then we're just really dialing in that skin. We want that to be sitting in a good place. And now we're actually going to go in and just adjust our highlights slightly. Actually, before that, I just want to make sure that we're exactly where we want to be as far as exposure goes before we go too far ahead. Yeah, okay, we're looking pretty good. You essentially want your skin tones to be sitting on this like 70-ish IRE threshold. And so for us, we can see this is going to be essentially the brightest part of our image. So we are sitting around that 70 IRE threshold with our skin tones. I think from what I can tell, I think a bit of this gray is what's making some of this highlight. So as far as I can see, I think some of our skin tones here are falling a little bit dark. So I'm just gonna, I don't think it's gonna need even like a full like ISO boost. I think we're just gonna take our exposure adjust and just bump it just a little bit. Like not a lot at all. And just see how that's looking. Yeah, it's feeling pretty good to me. And we can see we're getting a little hot on this edge here, but we'll tame that down in a second. This is just going to, it's just going to be our overall kind of threshold that we're sitting at. I'm just looking at these midtones, like right in this gradient. I want those to be the exposure that we need, and we'll tame some of these highlights in a second. So that's feeling like it's in a good spot. We have a good kind of contrast. We have a good pop of those highlights and those shadows. So we're going to dive into these highlights now. And again, under our qualifier, we're just going to disable hue and saturation. And under luminance, we're just going to scooch this along, adjust the low soft a little bit. We'll just see what we're actually qualifying here. Helps if we actually enable the node, hey? There we go. Okay, so we're just trying to get like the very brightest parts of the image. So that would just be that one side of my face and a little bit of that light streak. Let's try something like that. Okay, now we're gonna come into our curves here, and we're just gonna bring down our exposure just a little bit. Not a lot. Just enough to start taking the edge off. Go maybe a little bit more. Just smoothing that skin tone out. So if we go full screen, you can maybe see it a little bit better. You can see all of these little highlights here, just these hot spots. Just taming them, just bring them in just a little bit. You can see even on my forehead, there's a little bit of a hot spot. It's just kind of evening it out. I think we can go almost even a bit further. Something like that. It's feeling decently good to me. Yeah, we just get a little bit of that saturation back, a little bit more detail. See, even on my nose, this hot spot, we're just taming it a little bit. I think that feels pretty good. Just fiddle with it just a touch more. We're just kind of getting the most out of that dynamic range, making sure that nothing's too hot on us. Okay, I think that feels good to me. So I'm gonna go under my global adjust, and because we already have this look, I don't think we have to do a lot. But we're gonna go under our editable splines, and we're just gonna add a little bit of a curve here. So just bringing up the highlights ever so slightly. Bring our shadows down just a little bit. We're not doing a lot here with these curves. We're just going enough to give us a little bit of pop, but we don't want to go too far with it. We're just making really, really subtle adjustments. It's really easy to go too far with these tools. We do want it to kind of pop off our screen, but there is absolutely such a thing as going too far, and so we want to be really careful. Before, after. Just giving us a little bit more of that contrast. Something like that's feeling pretty good. Bring a little more shadow in. Just getting a little more density in there. Yeah, something like that feels pretty good to me. Okay, so we're gonna go over to our glow, and we're gonna add glow onto this node. So we're going to bring the shine threshold all the way down. We're going to change this to soft light. And then we're just going to pull this spread back a little bit. Don't want to go too crazy with this. And we're going to turn our gamma up, gain down. Something like that with gain, I think. And then figure out where we want that gamma sitting. Maybe something like that. And then I'm going to change our global blend in a second here. Let's just pull our saturation down a little bit. We already have a lot of saturation in our scene. I don't want to go crazy here. And let's fiddle with our global blend as well. Just see how much of this we really want to bring in. You can see this just adds, I don't know, there's something about it, just the way that it handles saturation, just the smoothing kind of over the skin. It just feels really, really good on footage. Maybe we'll go a little bit more. I kind of love the look of glow, and so I don't know, maybe this is too far for your guys' taste, but I'm kind of a fan. I'm gonna change the gain a little bit, just tame it, play with our gamma. Something in that realm there. Play with our spread a little bit. Okay. I think it's feeling pretty good. Let's just fiddle with our saturation just a touch, see how much we really want in here. I barely have any of the saturation in, like we're almost at 0, but I think having a little bit of it in feels really good. It just adds a little something to the colors, and I like that. Still want it to be believable, we still want it to be natural. I feel like I might fiddle with this gain just a little bit. Bring it down just a touch. I think we're getting a little hot in some parts. Bring the gamma up a little bit. Just getting some detail back in the jacket there, just in our darkest parts of the image. Something like that. Hint less saturation. Okay, that's feeling pretty good to me. I feel pretty happy about that. Okay, let's bump over to sharpness here. So we'll go under our sharpening. We'll just bring this back, maybe like 3 to like 47. Bring this back around 3 as well. See what this is doing for us. Yeah, that just gives us a little bit of extra pop there. I might actually come back a little bit. I think just on the skin tones we're getting a little bit harsh. I don't want to see every single pore, so maybe we'll come back like 1 on each of these. Yeah, I think that's a little bit more natural. We still have detail, but it's not quite as in your face. I don't know if you can even see this on YouTube, but okay, let's go to Vignette. So this is going to be something that I'm not going to use on every single clip, but I'm going to have it here just as an option if we would like it. And I'm just going to keep this kind of generic, so I have it in the center. And that's probably going to give us the best overall versatility. And we're going to make the feather all the way, and we're just going to invert this and go to curves, and let's make sure we're off of editable splines, and we're just going to bring our exposure down just a little bit. Always kind of like go a little too far and then bring it back, see where it feels natural. We want to bring a little bit of intention, but we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to we don't want to go so far that it seems manufactured. We want it to still fall in that realm where it's believable, it's natural. Something like that. Not a lot, just a little bit there. Little finesse. Okay, that is essentially where we're going to camp out. I'm going to go to grain here and apply that at this point. And let's go to 35 mil. I'm just gonna zoom in a bunch here. Okay, and let's play around with these settings a little bit. See the texture where it is. Bring the grain size down a little bit. ratio down a little bit. Actually, let's leave that where it is. Bring the strength down just a little bit. Make sure there's no saturation. Great. Strength down just a touch more. Just want it subtly in there. I don't know if you guys can even see that, but it is there. It just adds a little bit of texture. Okay, that looks great. Zoom back out. Perfect. Okay, so let's look at where we kind of came from. So obviously we have our full log. And then we had our kind of like conversion. So we have our, here, I'm just going to bring this down a little bit so that's easier to select these. This is where we came from with just the color space and LUT. So without the LUT, we had converted into Cineon. Then we added the LUT. Then we came in, we didn't do anything with balance yet, but we created a look. Changed our skin tones. We added highlights. Actually, looking at the skin, I'm just going to make one adjustment here really quick because I think we're still sitting a little on that green side. So I just want to be mindful and careful with that. Come back a little bit towards that magenta. Obviously, don't want to go too far. Yeah, something like that feels a little bit better. I'm just looking in this gray, like I don't want the gray to be so green because it is picking up some of those orange tones there in the selection. And to be fair, my skin tones do sit a little bit red. I wish that was not true, but unfortunately it is. And so I just have to kind of come to terms with the fact that my skin always just looks a little bit red, but at least we can fix it a little bit there. So that's feeling more natural to me. So let's look at this again. So we created our look, changed our skin, brought our highlights, reeled them back just a little bit, and then we added a global adjustment, just adding a little bit more contrast. We added some glow, sharpening, a vignette, and then we added our grain at the end. And that is essentially our look. I think looking at this, I'm feeling like maybe we have just a touch too much saturation. I feel like we could feel a little more refined if we just pulled that back a little bit. Nothing too crazy, but just something even in there. I'm feeling like that's just helping us out. It feels a little bit more intentional, a little bit more refined. It's not quite as crazy saturated on those skin tones. Yeah, something like that. It's crazy how much these little tiny adjustments actually make a difference. So one thing I am seeing, or just kind of want to be careful about, is on our skin here, I just see a lot of blotchiness in this selection. And one, I want to see if we can dial it in a little bit more. It's going to be kind of hard to get much more out without affecting our skin. But what I can do is I can come in here and just denoise it a little bit. So that's going to help take away some of that blotchiness and just smooth out our selection. And maybe we'll blur it a little bit more, denoise a little bit more. At least it'll be a little bit smoother that way. I think that's where we're going to land the plane, land the ship, so to speak. I have no idea if this was useful for you. Let me know in the comments. This is just me kind of fiddling around, just seeing what works, what doesn't, and just kind of building this thing out. This look may change and evolve, but I think this is going to be the starting place where I'm going to start just applying this to projects, and I'm sure it will be refined over time. So anyway, hopefully you liked this video. Give it a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will go ahead and see you in the next one.